All right. So thanks everyone for coming to our 30-minute presentation. Today we have Darryl O'Brien, who is the head of the Education Committee Working Party, looking at improving ACERs and AUERs. He'll be presenting to us today, I hope, on the expectations related to completing these reports. So I'll hand over to you, Darryl, if that's
Thanks,
okay.
Lydia. Yep, no worries. I'll just share my screen. So can you see the PowerPoint there?
Yep, thanks.
Great. No worries. Thanks, everybody. I'll run through this so we don't spend too much time. We've got a working group set up looking at ACERs mainly, but it's also going to be for the AUERs as well. So I'll just touch briefly on the ACERs and then we'll go on to the unit enhancements because that's mainly what everybody who's a unit coordinator wants to know about. So I guess the background is we're a self-accrediting authority as the university, and the ACERs and AUERs form part of our quality assurance framework, so it's important that we get them right. So the general, I suppose, the rules, I guess, or guidelines we've looked at for the ACERs, and this will be similar for the AUERs when we get to them, are that they provide a mechanism for the annual review of your course or your unit. They're looking at enrolment and attrition trends, so we can see whether there's a problem developing, whether it could affect the sustainability of a course or a unit, or indeed whether something's working really well and it's something that we could pick up and use in other units. With the ACERs, they have that SWOT analysis, but again, there's no reason why you couldn't look at a little SWOT analysis when you're doing your unit enhancement. Both of them provide mechanisms to report on previous recommendations, and I guess it's important to look at that and make sure that any recommendations have been acted on in the intervening period, and if not, just an explanation why not. With the ACERs, they do detail professional accreditation status, and just with that, there's professional accreditation and there's learned society accreditation, and they're two different things. So professional accreditation would be for the nursing, is where you have to be registered by your professional body, whereas a learned society just would accredit a course, but you don't have to be licensed or registered with them. That's sort of the difference there. And look at what's worked and areas that need improvement. And just with the ACERs as well, if you're ahead of course, just remember that your nested courses have to have a separate ACER done, and try to avoid the temptation of just cutting and pasting from the parent course into the nested one. Try to look at them separately. With the ACERs, just to finish off on those, the completed ACER will be tabled at your relevant discipline meeting if you have discipline meetings. If there's no discipline meeting, it does get submitted to the course committee meeting, and it should be reviewed there and assess to see if it's going to comply. If it does go through course committee, then it does go to the education committee meeting, and that's where we come in now with the working group. As the working group will review every ACER as part of the education committee, and what we're trying to move away from is a culture that's sort of a box ticking exercise to one that's more of a continuous improvement type culture. So we look at it as an opportunity to see what's worked and what can be improved. Since we've started the working group, around a quarter of the ACERs are getting returned for amendments. So we'll move on to the hours. So this is our unit enhancement report. I guess the important thing that differentiates the AUER is that it only ever goes to course committee. It doesn't actually go to the education committee. So it's only at the course committee that the auditing will occur and the quality assurance occurs. So what we're trying to do as part of this working group is get a good guide to both ACERs and AUERs so that you've got some benchmarks you can work to. I'm just going to go through there's 9 sections, and I just want to go through them step by step quickly and just explain what it is, which I guess you know what they're doing, but what we're looking at is what would be suboptimal or not a very good report, and what would we consider to be best practice. So the first one's in unit details, just check the accuracy and make sure there's no errors there. The second section you'll be filling out is your unit enrolments. And with this, we probably want to be looking at and discussing any trends that are arising. So this is as far as the data type goes, this is a quantitative data, and it's an internal benchmarking mechanism that's used. A suboptimal one would have limited analysis, as you can see on the screen, and really no discussion of factors that may influence enrolment. I know overall enrolments we can't really do much about as far as being a head of course or a unit coordinator, but look at the trends that are there and see if there's some reason. Are there new courses that other institutions have introduced? Are there factors that are leading to this change in enrolments? A best practice would look at that data and consider strategic decisions at the course and university level that might have influenced that enrolment trend. So the external environment, as I mentioned before, and also a comparative analysis of the other benchmarks to help support the trend analysis. So looking at, the unit evaluation reports, looking at pass rates, all of those things. So they sort of lining up against that. So that's number 2, unit enrolments. Unit evaluations. So these are pretty important to see what's been going on. What have we been scoring in our unit? Again, this is quantitative to an extent, and it's an external benchmarking but by the students. Again, it's really just looking at what they're telling us and see where we can improve. So when you're filling out your report, really have a look at the trend analysis and see what factors affect the survey result. Have you changed something recently? Are there similar results replicating? Those sort of things. So it's really about looking at what the data is telling us and just explaining what the factors behind it might be driving that. The results or the survey findings should also be discussed in the Section 8 Good Practice Reflection. So a lot of this should draw down into that final section. So that's Section 3. Section 4, grade distribution. I mean, again, it's just considering the trends and it's having a look at previous grades to see if there's been any sort of changes that could indicate a skew one way or the other. Again, the findings should be discussed in your reflective section in Section 8. And perhaps quite often, well, not quite often, but when I look at some of ours that we do, there's a preponderance of, say, HDs. And you'd sort of question why there's so many HDs. Is the assessment task too easy? Is it really appropriate for their level? Those sort of things. So just ask the question, I guess. Previous recommendations, part 5. And again, there's not much you can do with this because it's a previous recommendation, but I guess it's looking at what recommendations were made and were there any recommendations that would necessitate a change in unit proposal, something of that nature, or just a change of practice, and just consider, have they been done? And again, if not, why not? Section 6, feedback and recommendations. I find this is really useful to do a thematic analysis. So I guess one thing with the recommendations, there's a couple of points with this. Generally, it's probably going to be populated out of the student evaluation survey and the comments that are made there. I know you see it's the temptation to put all the positive stuff in there, but I think if it's constructive criticism that's been made that is valid, I don't see a problem with putting that into the feedback and recommendations. And then have a look at it to see what changes that may require. Change to assessment assessment type, maybe say group work, moving away from group work into individual assignments for argument's sake. And that's where the thematic analysis is useful, because what I'll do is I'll go back through for say 3 or 4 years of unit evaluations and see if there's a trend that's emerged year on year, and then that'll inform whether that needs to have a change made, and also identify what's working, what do the students like that we can maintain with that. So that's probably, I think, the most useful part of the whole process as far as getting some data that you can actually do something about. 7's are requirements for change. This is resource implications. It just asks you the question, so you have to think about it. Do they trigger, or do the changes trigger a change unit proposal? And I'll just go through in a minute about what that entails and some of the timelines there. The final one that you'll be filling out is good practice learning teaching assessment. And this is the opportunity for reflection on your unit enhancement. So look at what worked, where you can improve, and also look at the previous section and make sure that the data is consistent from the previous section when you're discussing your good practice there. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of information or a huge amount of data being discussed here, I guess, but it's just about having a look at what can be improved, look at the negative trends, and if there's anything you can do. And also, like I say, look at the positive things that have worked. And then you can look at whether or not they could be applied across similar units. So when you have your course committee meeting, have a discussion about what initiatives may have worked. Also, have a look at the policies when you're looking at these changes or some of these, and just make sure you're compliant with the policy. For example, in learning and teaching, there's a policy requirement that a learning outcome's not assessed more than 2 times. So I believe that's up for renewal, or they might be changing that, but it's an example of a policy when you're looking at your assessment tasks, just to make sure you're compliant with the policy. And I'm sure if you're not sure, Julie would be able to help you out with any questions there. Section 9 is the approval. That's just self-populated in AIMS. Now, the other thing to think about, I suppose, is when do you need to do a change unit proposal and what just can be done without that. Essentially, you'll do a change unit proposal if it's altering the number or type of assessment, altering the assessment weighing, or altering or amending the unit learning outcomes. So if it's any one of those sort of things, you'll be doing a change unit proposal. But importantly, the change unit proposals don't go to Education Committee. They're dealt with at the course committee level. So that makes it a bit easier as far as the bureaucratic structure, but it also means at your course committee level, you have to be mindful that you're the last check and balance on any of these changes. So it does need to be supported by the evidence as far as what you're proposing to do. So I think it's a good initiative that the unit proposals are done at that level, because it does mean that there's not this bureaucratic inertia that it sort of prevents people making positive changes. So we do quite a few unit proposals in my area, just to make sure we're continually improving what we're doing. Finally, the timelines for these changes, if you wanted to do a change unit proposal, they're a term-based deadline. Term 1 2019 changes have to be done by 17 December this year. So if you were looking at doing a change proposal for term 1 next year, 17 December. They don't have the later ones out, but if you go to AIMS and have a look down there, you can see under significant dates, you can do a drop down there and it'll give you significant dates for when the due time is for the change unit proposal. And you'd want it be in, like, realistically, it's December, so you'd really want to be thinking your November course committee meeting at the very latest to get it in case you have to do any changes on that. So that's pretty much just a quick rundown on everything that I had there. I think now I can hand it back to Julie and see if there's anybody that has any questions that they have about anything that we've discussed here.
I'm not sure that Julie's here.
Yeah, sorry, Lydia.
Yep, but does anybody have any questions for Daryl at all? That was a really great overview. I think put things into perspective. Does anybody have any curly questions? Like Annie, do you have that curly question that you had for me? Would you like to ask Daryl? Annie, you're on mute.
I'll speak to about you that one-on-one, Lydia, because that was about some feedback from the school course, the one we had in September, to add to it, but yeah.
So we have that issue, Daryl, where we have a few courses a few units that don't have any students, and it's challenging to try and write the annual unit enhancement report with not a lot of data.
I think you've just got to explain why that's the case. When we look at it at the ACER level, we read them as though we have no idea what this is about. We're coming in cold, and this ACER or Unit Enhancement Report needs to tell us everything we need to know. So if there's no students there could be a very good reason for that. It might be a teach out or something like that. Just explain what it is, why it is. There's another thing too that I'm on a Moodle steering committee as well, and just to let you know, I've never had it myself, but apparently there has been some concerns from academic staff with some of the tone of the comments that are made in the unit evaluation from students. And the university does take that pretty seriously because it has caused some distress with some of the tone of the content. So at the moment, they're looking at a filtering system to be able to filter out certain language so that it doesn't reduce to the level of personal abuse, basically. So I don't know if anyone's come across that, but if you have, they are looking at trying to do something about that as well. And as I say, I think I'm all for and I ask my students to give us the feedback and tell us what they didn't like, provided it's constructive criticism. I think that's really good because we're often, we're seeing only our side of it. We're not seeing the student view. And I think it's really good. You can get some really good information from the students as long as they keep it at that level where it's constructive. So, yes. Anything else, Lydia?
Oh, I'll throw it open to my colleagues.
Yeah, I am here now. My green went eventually. I had a question. It was about, I guess, when people get bad evaluations and how you actually, do you justify that, rather justifying that in there? And how do you actually deal with that in your annual unit enhancement report when there is seemingly biased evaluations, or do you just ignore it?
I don't. To be honest, to touch wood, I haven't had too many problems in that area yet, but it will happen one day. I think I look at the trend analysis for a start, because if you haven't really changed anything and you've had good feedback up to date and suddenly you get this bad one, I think it could be more about the student than about you. And I would draw their attention to that. And often when you read the comments, the unit evaluation's the only chance some students get to vent about the university generally. So they might have had a problem with admission, or they might have had a problem with something else, but they don't have any mechanism really, but this is one way they can get back. So I do look at some of those comments as well, and if my DDLT asks a question, it's about, well, these weren't things under our control. And I do think the unit evaluation, my personal view is I don't know whether they're getting towards outliving their usefulness, because I think you tend to get the polarised views. You either get the students that really hate you or they really love you. And the bell curve in the middle tends to be sort of, they're apathetic to some extent. And when you think these students might be doing 3 or 4 units and they might be doing 2 or 3 terms a year, that's a lot of surveys where they're just telling you the same thing over and over again. So this is only my own personal view, but I sort of think that maybe to an extent the useful data has been mined out of this particular vein. So I don't know if that's controversial, probably. But anyway.
Something else that I notice in our enhancement reports is the way that people, and it's difficult to do, is when you look at your grades. What are you going to compare them against? A lot of people compare them against a bell curve, but a bell curve is not, to me, is not that an accurate thing to compare it or benchmark it against. And it's difficult to explain your grades, and it does, at times it depends upon the cohort of students. So have you got any advice there, Daryl?
No, I agree again, and not greatly. I mean, again, I think it's looking at the trends over time. And the ones that, when we have our committee meetings and our grade meetings, the ones that get your attention are the ones where there's a real lot of HDs and Ds, that real skew one way or the other. But then it will depend, as you say. I think you've got to take this within context as well, because you could have a late progression unit where the students are motivated, there's small numbers, they're going to do well, they want to do well, and they want to get a good result. So I think you've got to sort of explain the context of the unit that those grades are sitting within. And then again, yeah, look at the trends. If you're getting a real lot of fails consistently in the unit, for argument's sake, that's something you'd want to sort of consider. But that also gets picked up as well when you do your unit coordinators report, where if you get a failure rate of, well, less than 85 or a success rate, sorry, of less than 85, you have to talk to that there as well. So yeah, grades it's a bit of a, although it's quantitative, there's various reasons behind that may be outside of our control. So trend analysis, perhaps.
Hi, Daryl, it's Rob here.
Hey.
Do we have any benchmarks for expected feedback in terms of, 20% of students or 50% of students need to feedback? I guess I'm just wondering, I'm working in a little bit of a silo here. I coordinated a unit last semester where there was, something like 12%, only 12% of students left feedback. Yet this semester I'm currently up to 50% and I'm feeling that that's wonderful, but I'm just wondering, where does that sit in terms of benchmarking for other people's units?
Yeah, you've probably met the minimum standard at 50 because that's the university likes 50% for the unit evaluations.
Yep.
And it's getting harder and harder to get to that 50%, as I mentioned before, for various reasons. But yeah, they're looking at a 50% as the minimum. And then I'm not sure about your school, but in our school, they use a traffic light. I think is that common? Do you have the traffic light? Yeah, so.
I think we do.
Yeah, if you don't get the 50%, then that's like an amber or whatever it is, and then it goes across. What I find, for what it's worth, to try to get the feedback for the students, I start pestering them around about week 8. Every time I send an email and use flash, hey, don't forget, and regardless, you just stagger over the line, usually at around 50%, 55 maybe.
I got many students write to me directly via email and giving, quite a lot of qualitative feedback about the unit, and I suggested them to put it into the, hit the red button and give that as feedback, but I'm not sure that they all have. Are you allowed to use some of that information in your unit enhancement reports?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, by all means. I mean, it's positive feedback, and we want to encourage the students to give us that feedback, to let us, like I say, we sort of don't see what they see. And what was really helpful for me was when I did the grad cert in tertiary ed, and putting yourself in the position of the student, how to negotiate everything and work with everything out. It's a good thing to see what they see, which we don't often do. So yeah, and if they're giving you that feedback, even if it is an email, you're doing the right thing. Just suggest they put it in there on the unit, evaluation, but definitely take it on board in any case. So thanks.
Thanks, Darryl.
No worries.
I have not so much a question, more so a statement, and you may have covered this in the first couple of moments. For large courses, obtaining that 50% is exceedingly difficult. If you have a course of 35 students, obtaining 50% is reasonably readily achieved, even if you're contacting the students. But if you've got courses, as we do, of 500 students, sometimes getting that 50%. And another comment is that we are usually releasing their last assessment item at the same time that feedback is closing. So students that have not performed as well as they had envisaged themselves performing automatically go into, whose fault is it that I didn't do so well? So it's not really a question, it's just more a food for thought.
I agree totally, because I think you can build up a more personal sense of engagement in the smaller units, and then the students are they feel like there's a bit of an investment. You've looked after me, so I'll do you a favour here. When it gets a bit anonymous, you don't have that advantage. And definitely I think the unit evaluations are open too long, but I think they're open too early because it's only anecdotal. But what I see is most of my feedback comes in once the last assessment grade's been posted. They're waiting for that last grade. And there was some talk a couple of weeks ago about just shutting the period down to 2 weeks. And like my view was, yeah, but it's which 2 weeks? It needs to be capturing that last assessment task. And what makes it harder if you've got exams too, you're not meant to you're not meant to release the exam result until grade certification, which is well and truly after the unit enhancement report shut. So I think some of the processes and policies don't quite align with each other as far as this goes. So, but I agree with your comments, Katrina.
And the other food for thought was that you were mentioning before about, or Julie had mentioned also about the bell curve. So while it's a lovely statistical model to base our grades on, it also needs, and you did touch on this, to be considered in context. So for a first year, first term course unit, you wouldn't be expecting to see a great deal of high distinctions. That would imply that the assessment is too easy. But as someone else mentioned, into third year or some of the fourth year units, if they've been around long enough, they should have acquired a great deal of academic prowess. So again, your bell curve should see that skewing to the left again.
Yeah, it is about context, I think, but it's also about remembering what we're doing with the unit enhancement report. It is a continuous improvement process, and it's just looking at what that data is telling us. And as I say, it's really analysing the trends and any outliers that are sitting there and thinking, well, why is that an outlier? It could be positive or negative. If it's positive and you've picked up on something that works really well, share it and let people know. If it's not working as well, it's a continuous improvement. Let's see how we can improve it. So that's sort of, and that's what we're trying to do at the working group. And one of the deliverables I mentioned at the start is we want to get some great guides there, because I think part of the problem is, to date, nobody really knows what's expected when you're filling these things out. And that is a problem. We need to have some benchmarking in place. And if we've got the benchmarking and everybody knows what's expected of them, everybody will do it. We'll get consistency. And next time we get the TEXA audit, it'll be a big improvement possibly on the inconsistency that might have been there. So they're not a punitive thing by any means. I think they're just that continuous improvement mechanism just to explain what happened that particular time in that particular unit. And you only have to do, if you do units more than once a year, you only have to do it once. If you don't know to, it'll come up to be done the first time that the unit's run. So if you're scheduling people, schedule yourself into the second run of the unit, then you don't have to do it. The unit coordinator in the first one will get that privilege. So were there any other questions or any comments about that, just while we wrap up?
Daryl, I've just got one other comment. In the subject that I'm currently teaching, there's 215 students enrolled, of which only 174 put in their assignments. So just going back to that evaluation, getting to that 50%, it should actually be 50% of active students, not the total number enrolled, because as a first year, first semester subject, they tend to intermit or go part-time quite regularly. So I think if there can be some, I don't know how you can fix that, but it just seems to skew the figures a bit.
Yeah, I agree. That's a true statement as well. I mean, they could take it after census date as enrolled students, but all I do is I look at that and it says 50%, but actually there was only, 30 students out of the 50 left. So, and I've got 15 responses, so I did get 50% of the live students sort of. So just explain again why that is the case. But I agree, I don't think it's fair on us that we're trying to get 50% out of, the remaining 70% that are left. So, yeah. Okay, were there any other questions or comments?
It's Wendy. I've just got one more comment to make, and this is coming just from conversations with students within our cohort, is that they're complaining that they often feel badgered to press that big red button, particularly if they've got 4 courses they're undertaking. We get the feedback from them that they almost, they feel a little harassed by not just our course, but, everybody wanting their feedback.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what I mentioned before. I think we're sort of over surveying them now, and but we've got that benchmark on us. I know when you go in and you look at a student view, from as soon as the survey opens, every time they go to the Moodle site, it pops up as a box to fill out the survey. So they do get a fair bit of prompting on it. But I think it's sort of we're chasing diminishing returns after a while. So, but again, that's only my personal view, speaking on behalf of me, and not.
Look, I agree, Daryl, and I think that, and if you think about our own life, if you buy something, if you go to a particular site, there's always a survey that pops up, and how many times, and I hardly ever fill out any of them, and yet we're expecting students to fill out surveys, and we basing our evaluations or our AUERs on that. It's all very difficult. But I think we're going to tie up now because I promised staff only 30 minutes of their time and only 30 minutes of your time. So I really want to thank you for talking to us today with your wisdom and your experience and the position that you're in at the moment, trying to make us a better quality control for the university. I think it's been really helpful. It's given me some more ideas to actually how to, I guess, assess them at the course committee and also how to work with staff. So I really appreciate your time and giving up your time.
No worries. My pleasure, Julie. Thanks for everybody taking the time to come and have a listen.
Thanks.
See ya.
See you all later.